There's a place in your brain that lights up, not when you think, but when you believe. Not metaphor, not myth, matter. It flares when you pray, when you surrender, when you feel something greater watching back. Scientists call it the God spot. But that's too small a name for what they found. Because what if God isn't somewhere above us, but deep inside our minds? Not as a fantasy, not as faith, but as a real neurological frequency, measurable, repeatable, and terrifyingly powerful. Imagine this. You close your eyes. You feel peace, light, a presence. That's not your imagination, it's your brain, activating something ancient, something universal. And one woman had the courage to follow that signal to its source. She wasn't a prophet, she wasn't a priest, she was a neuroscientist. Her name was Natalia Bekhtereva. And what she discovered might change the way we understand belief forever. To find where God lives in the brain, we have to start with the woman who dared to look. Natalia Bekhtereva, Soviet neuroscientist, fierce skeptic, raised in a world where God was not just doubted, he was illegal. In Soviet Russia, religion was branded a weakness. Belief could get you silenced, or worse. But Natalia didn't care about dogma on either side. She wasn't chasing God, she was chasing truth. The kind you could measure, scan, photograph. She studied memory, perception, consciousness. What made us us? Her mind was sharp, her methods sharper. She believed the brain held every answer. Until it didn't. She began to see things, patterns she couldn't explain. Patients who should have been unconscious. Speaking of light, people who had clinically died, returning with impossible clarity. Visions during meditation. Encounters with dead relatives. Emotions that lit up the brain like fire. At first, she dismissed them. Natalia didn't run from the mystery. She ran a scan on it. She brought in monks, nuns, atheists, ordinary people. Some prayed, some meditated, some just sat in silence. And then she watched their brains. Not for emotions, not for imagination, for activation, neural ignition. What she found stunned her. During deep prayer or meditation, the brain didn't relax. It exploded with activity. Memory, emotion, identity. The limbic system lit up. So did the temporal lobes, the parts tied to self, meaning, and deep emotion. These weren't random bursts. They looked exactly like the patterns seen in moments of overwhelming love or total existential fear. One subject said, "It felt like something was with me, around me, inside me, not a thought, a presence." This wasn't fantasy. It was physiological. The brain was responding to something as real as pain or touch. So Bekhtereva wrote a new theory. Natalia knew something most people don't want to hear. The same part of your brain that lights up in spiritual awe can also be used to make you obey. So she turned her research toward another group. People with damage to their frontal lobes, the part of the brain that handles self-awareness, judgment, and moral reasoning. What she found was disturbing. These patients didn't argue, they didn't analyze, they just followed. No resistance, no questions, just total submission to external commands. Their brains weren't processing meaning, they were obeying on a neurological level. Then came the punch. Bekhtereva noticed the same brain patterns in people deep in certain extreme religious states. Same drop in frontal lobe activity. Same surrender. Same absence of doubt. One group was diagnosed with brain damage, the other was called devout. She didn't say this to mock religion, she said it to warn us. Natalia had studied the living, but now she turned to those who had died, not metaphorically, clinically, medically, dead, flatline, no heartbeat, no oxygen. And then they came back. What they described, It wasn't vague, it wasn't foggy, it was vivid, precise, repeated. One man said he floated above the hospital table, watching his own surgery. Another described a tunnel. Light, not brightness, but presence. A voice he didn't hear, yet understood. The stories varied in shape, but not in feeling, peace, clarity, connection, as if they hadn't dreamed something, but returned from something. Bekhtereva had every reason to dismiss it: lack of oxygen, DMT bursts, the dying brain's last illusion. But one thing bothered her: the consistency. People of different ages, cultures, languages, all describing the same place. And then it got personal. In her later years, Natalia began documenting her own strange experiences. Bekhtereva never wrote a manifesto, never claimed to prove anything. She was a scientist to the end. But in her final writings, something changed. Not the data, but the tone. She stopped asking, "Is God real?" and started asking, "What does this experience want from us?" She began to believe real faith doesn't silence the brain. It awakens it, not through submission, but through courage, to wonder, to wrestle, to walk into the dark. She wrote, "The divine is not afraid of your questions. It lives in them." What if belief isn't the end of thinking, but the beginning of transformation? Not blind faith, not hard atheism, but something deeper, the willingness to stay in the mystery. She no longer saw science and spirituality as opposites. She saw them as languages, both trying to name what can't be named. One maps the brain, the other maps meaning, and somewhere between the two is the pulse of something real. In the end, she left no final. So now I ask you, not as a scientist, not as a preacher, but as a human being, what do you believe? Does your brain create God, or does it connect to something beyond it? Let's find out. If you believe it's all internal, thoughts, neurons, evolution, type brain in the comments. If you believe there's something more, something your brain receives, not invents, type soul. No arguments, no right answer. Just a shared moment of curiosity. And if this video stirred something in you, a memory, a question, a presence you've tried to ignore, don't let it fade. Like the video if it hit you. Share it with someone who's wrestling too. Subscribe for more journeys into the mind, the soul, and the strange space where they meet. Because someone else out there is looking for the same question you are. And maybe, just maybe, the divine lives in the people brave enough to look for it.